Đấy là con người của sự tận tụy và hy sinh.
Làm thế nào để đưa được nhiều nhất những cái kiến thức cho bọn mình.
Một người thầy lớn của tất cả các bác sĩ ở khoa.
He is a wonderful mentor. He has been very supportive, very helpful, very smart.
Ông Colin này thì là người làm việc, như là một người cha nếu mà đối với các bạn trẻ, và nếu không cũng như là người anh.
Ông rất có hiếu với mẹ, ông luôn làm cái gì ông cũng nghĩ đến mẹ. Ngoài ra thì ông cũng rất yêu động vật,
nghiêm khắc, tận tụy nhưng cũng hết lòng vì bệnh nhân.
I hope that Dr. Colin can get more funding so that we all can come back.
In the previous clip, you have just seen comments from doctors and nurses at the National Hospital of Pediatrics here in Hanoi about our guest today. His name is Dr. Colin Partridge, and he is currently a doctor at the San Francisco General Hospital and the Medical Center under the University of California in San Francisco. And for the past 10 years, he has dedicated his time to changing the pediatric scene here in Vietnam and improving on the scientific research method at the National Hospital of Pediatrics in Hanoi. And today we're very lucky to have him here to talk about his dedication to the field here in the country. Hello, Dr. Partridge. Thank you very much,
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be invited.
Thank you. How are you today?
Good. Thank you very much. I've had a wonderful trip in Vietnam. I think this is my 17th trip, and I love coming back to Hanoi and working here.
Yes, as we said, I mean, you've had a connection with Vietnam for 10 years now, and we're very lucky to have you here because you've taken time off of your very busy schedule, I understand. Now, could you share with us, how did your connection with Vietnam begin?
To be honest, it was a cold call from someone who knew someone I had worked with on a conference in medical ethics, who knew that I had also done work in Southeast Asia in 6 countries, looking at the counseling and decision-making for very premature infants. That work then led this person to call from Orbis International, a volunteer group, NGO, that focuses on ophthalmic diseases. And this was their first prevention project in pediatrics. They were looking at whether we could prevent retinopathy of prematurity, a vascular condition caused by high oxygen levels in extremely premature infants. Now that the National Hospital and other centers in Vietnam were able to keep premature infants alive, the infants were surviving with retinal damage that could potentially blind them. So ours was a 4-year project to see if we could improve survival statistics and bring down the incidence of retinopathy of prematurity.
Retinal disease, exactly. So what did you find out about this particular retinal disease in Vietnam? What were the cases? How was the rate?
Well, it was felt to be epidemic at the time and is still a significant problem because of high levels of oxygen exposure in preterm infants. At that time, even the National Hospital did not have the ability to mix oxygen and room air. So it was either a higher level of oxygen or pure oxygen or room air. And we know that premature infants can be damaged by having their blood levels of oxygen too high. What we found was exactly what I had feared, that we were able to improve through teaching and capacity building. We improved outcome statistics and the survival rates increased dramatically, but that was at the expense that some infants survived a larger proportion with retinopathy, which is our term for the medical condition. Because of that, funding was difficult, and the project was eventually not funded again by Orbis International. But that first work for the first 4 years triggered a successful collaboration between my university and the National Hospital of Pediatrics that has now gone on for just over 11 years. That has been tremendously successful. It changed from initial work in newborn intensive care capacity building to a broader range of capacity building and research projects in pediatric care at large, within the hospital here, and I've also worked at Tai Nguyen Medical University.
Now, after the funding from Orbis had ended, feeling the need to increase on or improve on the cooperation between the University of California in San Francisco and the hospital here in Vietnam, Dr. Partridge set up a 2-year project on capacity building for doctors and nurses at the neonatal intensive care nursery and infection prevention in the hospital. So let's have a look at that.
After the funding from Orbis International ended, Dr. Colin Partridge dedicated himself to raising funds to return to Vietnam and continue his contribution to infant health care. He successfully acquired funding for a 2-year project that focuses on improving staff capacity and controlling the risks of infections in hospitals. 4 groups of experts in infant healthcare and 6 U.S. experts groups in infection control have come to work and take part in training at the National Hospital of Pediatrics and Tai Nguyen General Hospital. 10 pediatricians have also had the opportunity to intern at hospitals in the U.S. The project helps improve newborn and pediatric care at the National Hospital of Pediatrics.
So we have learned that you have developed this own project, as you said, on capacity building and infection prevention in the hospital. Why do you want to develop this particular project in Vietnam?
Well, I think it's a wonderful country that is on the threshold of tremendous change, both socially, economically, and medically. So it's been exciting over the past 11 years to see the changes that have been possible, going from a very low level of technical expertise to things that we do currently in the United States. The Vietnamese physicians have been incredibly willing to learn, incredibly adept at taking on new technology. And the program, I think, is a model that can be started in Vietnam and then taken to other developing countries. It's a model that is very simple. It's not particularly brilliant as a plan, but it is simple to essentially position yourself with colleagues that are interested in improving their capacities in a different country, the sort of positioning step, then to educate and empower them, then to evaluate the results, and then to refocus the program to see what could be done differently, what could be done better, how you might achieve new goals. And then the last step is really to sustain the program, and that's one of the more difficult ones. As I mentioned, the Orbis funding ran out, and our current funding by the UCSF Medical Center will run out very shortly. We hope to fund this again, and we really have used those simple 5 steps to develop a train-the-trainer model, again, not something I invented by any means, where a few of us coming over from the United States or bringing Vietnamese physicians to the United States, also Vietnamese nurses, can train a few sentinel people that can then train many more and can diffuse what they have learned to their units in Vietnam and to other units that refer to them. So it's been a very successful model, we think. I am pleased with my work in Vietnam. It's very rewarding. I enjoy it tremendously. But also to be recognized by the Ministry of Health was a staggering event for me. I'm very honored to have received this award. But I think, in a sense, the value is when I see the Vietnamese physicians doing what we had talked about several months before. Or I see parents whose infants are now surviving and doing very well. And that fills my heart.
At the National Hospital of Pediatrics, how have the quality of pediatric healthcare in this hospital changed over the years that you have been here?
There have been stunning improvements. When I first arrived here, the nursery was quite small and had too many patients. It still is now with the new nursery, but They had very little equipment. They had some technical expertise and knowledge, and they had tremendous hunger to learn. So I started with really a lecture series and then bedside teaching. Orbis funded the beginning of a higher level of medical equipment, including incubators, ventilators, saturation monitors, IV syringe pumps for giving medications. So with teaching, then equipment, and then more teaching with the equipment, there was a dramatic improvement in first 24-hour survival mortality statistics, which had been essentially catastrophically high when I arrived in 2001, and dropped by 40%, so from 50% to under 10%.
That's great.
After more than 4 years, the project has brought tremendous changes in the quality of health diagnosis and care at the National Hospital of Pediatrics.
Chúng tôi đánh giá kết quả thì một cái bước tiến rất là lớn. Tất nhiên là chúng tôi cũng song song có rất là nhiều hoạt động, nhưng đặc biệt trong lĩnh vực sơ sinh thì chúng tôi đánh giá là cái tỷ lệ mà trẻ mà nhiễm, tức là bị mắc cái bệnh võng mạc ấy, thì sau những cái giai đoạn mà chúng tôi triển khai dự án ấy, thì có thể nói là cái việc mà kiểm soát nồng độ oxy là chúng tôi đã kiểm soát rất là tốt. Có thể nói rằng là cái việc kiểm soát nồng độ oxy và quan tâm vấn đề này thì sau dự án của chúng ta có thể nói là đã thay đổi hoàn toàn các cái nhận thức.
The project has seen the decrease in child deaths within hospital due to infection. In hospitals' intensive care units, signs have been installed to ensure complete infection control, along with improving upon the technical aspects and provision of new infection control devices. The death rate in the first 24 hours of infancy has dropped dramatically from 39% to below 12%.
Ngoài cái nghiên cứu ra thì Colin cũng đã giúp đưa rất nhiều chuyên gia chống nhiễm khuẩn sang bên này, xác định những cái vấn đề tồn tại, đưa ra các giải pháp. Qua đấy thì bọn em cũng đưa được khuyến nghị đến các khoa phòng, cũng như là cũng tổ chức hội thảo và tức là đưa trao đổi kiến thức đến cho bác sĩ điều dưỡng. Và chính vì như thế mọi người cũng nhận thức được là cái vai trò của chống nhiễm khuẩn, cũng như là thực hiện tốt hơn các quy trình, giảm được cái tỷ lệ chống nhiễm khuẩn trong bệnh viện.
They've said goodbye to one another after each project, and they've been reunited. Dr. Partridge is searching for more funding for future projects. The National Hospital of Pediatrics has become more than just a collaborator. It has become his second family, a place to which he always looks forward to returning.
Can you tell me a little bit about, over the years, obviously in the many trips, you said this is probably your 17th trip to Vietnam. You obviously dealt with many cases of child care here at the National Hospital and also in Thái Nguyên Hospital. Tell us about some of the specific cases that still stick to mind.
Well, there are many, many that come to mind. I was lecturing now years ago, and we left for 2 to 2.5 hours of lecture and left a child who was slightly ill with a condition of lung disease that prematures get, where their lungs collapse down. 2 hours later, when we came back from lecture, the baby was desperately ill, and we tried everything I could think of. The Japanese had donated what's called a high-frequency ventilator, a very different ventilator and new to them in Vietnam. And while I did not want to teach high-frequency ventilation, I wanted to teach simpler things that would be more useful in the context of Vietnam. We put that child on high-frequency ventilation, and that child survived. And I think is the first survivor, at least in northern Vietnam, of high-frequency ventilation.
And those are moments of gratification, basically.
To be able to turn to the parents and say your baby will survive this is tremendously rewarding.
Do you find that after those moments where, you know, obviously you are faced with a lot of hard cases, difficult cases here in Vietnam, do you ever feel like you want to give up?
Yes. There are times, about my 4th visit with Orbis, I was thinking back over the children I had seen, and it seemed to me that I had never seen the same child 2 days in a row, that everyone I touched died. That was profoundly depressing to me. I come with expertise. I hope I can work with them to develop the expertise here, and to have an infant that I might be able to salvage in the United States die here was tremendously difficult for me. And when I brought trainees in their pediatric residency, they were devastated. I essentially decided one day they would go shopping, their work was over, because they were not prepared for the level of stress of death and dying that they experienced, that the Vietnamese physicians deal with on a daily basis.
Exactly.
I could not function long term in this setting. They, at highest census, they had 296 patients in the nursery. And the staffing needs to be increased, both for nurses and physicians. In my nursery, in one nursery we have 18 to 20 patients.
Wow.
In the other nursery we have 15.
And here there are
and
nearly
we have
300.
much better staffing. So how they tolerate that day in and day out, day and night work, I cannot imagine. I've worked alongside them. I know to some extent what it's like, but only in brief periods where I go home and can take a few days rest after I've worked here.
What keeps you going, you know, after those, I mean, you said 4 years in, you looked back and you kind of felt a little desperation. What kept you going?
The tremendous need, I think, here, the intense devotion of the providers, nurses and doctors for their patients, and then small gestures that I think have meant tremendous positive feedback to me. When I was given the award last year, for which I'm incredibly grateful, but I was also given a plaque by the physicians in the nursery with their pictures and handwritten comments about our working relationship over the year. And one of the ones that I treasure was, "Thank you for your work. You are my most fearful teacher." And I think they're probably right. I probably am a bit awesome.
And talking about this,
terrifying.
actually, we have in the following a short clip about your lectures at the National Hospital of Pediatrics, where the doctors and nurses consider Dr. Partridge a very caring but also very strict teacher, as he said. So let's take a look at that.
Dr. Nguyễn Thị Hoa is one of the doctors of the nursery given the opportunity to go to the US to participate in a training on diagnosis and treatment of infant diseases. Dr. Hoa says that Professor Colin always encourages his students to constantly pose questions. He requires that each day a student must ask him at least 10 questions or they be sent back to Vietnam.
Cô Linh lúc nào cũng sát sao và giải quyết những cái thắc mắc của bọn mình và hướng dẫn cho bọn mình, và luôn luôn có một câu hỏi là: thế mày về Việt Nam mày sẽ thay đổi cái gì ở Việt Nam? Mày đã học được cái gì và mày sẽ làm gì để thay đổi? Lúc nào cũng trong cái câu cũng có những câu hỏi như thế.
Khi mà ông ấy đã làm việc của mình thì ông đặt ra rất nhiều câu hỏi và ông kiểm tra liên tục, và khi mà ông đưa ra vấn đề gì thì lần sau ông quay lại ông sẽ phải hỏi lại, kiểm tra xem mình có làm như thế không.
Also under the project, 4 doctors and 2 nurses within the nursery were given the chance to study in the US. Apart from training within the department, Dr. Partridge directly trains and monitors the progress of his students through conferences and bedside teaching. He tries to answer his students' concerns, particularly in difficult cases. To his students, Dr. Partridge is a devoted professional.
Cô Linh là một người thầy giáo thực sự là rất là nghiêm khắc nhưng mà rất là tận tâm với bệnh nhân và tức là tận tình với mọi người nữa.
Tất cả mọi người đều thấy rất là sợ vì là ông cứ hay nổi cáu rồi tức giận khi mà ông hỏi một cái gì đấy mà mình không nắm được về bệnh nhân.
With the knowledge learned from Dr. Partridge, the doctors and nurses have been able to gain more confidence in treating premature infants. According to Dr. Như, the Vice Director of the Infant Department, the rate of death in under 1.5 kilograms premature infants was relatively high. Nevertheless, with the help of Dr. Partridge, The department has been able now to save many premature and underweight infants.
Ông đã có những cái giúp đỡ rất là nhiệt tình, không những là ông giúp chúng tôi cảm nhận, tiếp cận được về cái bệnh tật ở trẻ sơ sinh, mà còn hướng dẫn cho chúng tôi làm sao hiểu rõ được cái bệnh đó, cũng như là cách giải quyết cái bệnh đó một cách triệt để. Trong những năm qua thì ở khoa chúng tôi đã có rất là nhiều cái thay đổi trong vấn đề đối với tất cả, với bác sĩ của chúng tôi cũng như điều dưỡng ở khoa chúng tôi hiểu được rất là rõ từng cái bệnh của nó, từng bệnh lý ở trẻ sơ sinh, cũng như là cách tiếp cận giải quyết vấn đề đó như thế nào.
As we saw in the clip, they very much respect your teaching, even though as strict as you may be, it proves to be helpful. So how do you see the importance of giving the lectures in the classroom? It all is part of the capacity building, as we have talked from the beginning to end.
The easiest measure is that I see them then doing things, both from the lectures here and from bedside teaching in California. And I think the trips to California have added both knowledge to their database, but have also given them confidence to come back and make change at the National Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
We brought a head nurse who developed flow sheets based on our flow sheets, and now the nurses are routinely using those. Specialists have come back and changed how they ventilate infants. Dr. Nguyen Ha has become a specialist in high-frequency ventilation and is now one of the vice directors of the nursery with Dr. Nhu, who also came to the United States in one of the very early trips supported by Orbis. I think the first level is very important. You see things beginning to happen.
Exactly.
The second level is, does that make a difference in the outcome of infants? And there's clear proof that it does, but that takes a while to happen.
Of course, I mean, it's not going to be an overnight miracle once you start teaching. What do you think of the ability of your students, your Vietnamese doctors and nurses who study with you?
They are quick to learn. They're excellent clinicians, in part because over the past years, they relied on clinical judgment and not the fancy tests that we tend to do to assist in diagnosis in the United States. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that they are avid learners. They will bring up questions that I had never thought of. They will test the limits of my knowledge. They very much want to understand what we do and why. And that's where I play in on the other side, because I don't want to tell them to do something. I want them to understand how they would modulate that bit of information and use it in the next patient and a slightly different patient, so that their ability is not to just apply a fixed rate or a fixed pressure, but to think, this is what this infant needs.
And be flexible, basically.
And really be inventive. And they are tremendously inventive. So that giving them knowledge and working with them to make it work has been a tremendously rewarding factor.
So now, can you tell us a little bit about some of the students you are impressed with? They must be watching at home right now,
They
thinking,
probably will be.
Whether their strict teacher would be impressed with them.
There are so many. I think for sheer energy, Dr. Hua would be come to mind. She actually gave me this tie.
Oh.
She was always excited to learn. She's become a good translator, and she takes messages from lectures to the bedside quickly. A much more serious and dedicated person is Dr. Lei Ha, and she is increasingly a clinical force within the nursery. If I go back in time, Dr. Nhu and Dr. Nguyen Ha are now people that I helped train to some extent years ago, who are now vice directors under Dr. Zheng of the intensive care nursery. There are many others that I would recall. One came to me and was planning to do a master's thesis, and she not only has completed her master's thesis, she went in a different direction that I thought maybe wasn't the best direction to go, and now has produced, I think she was awarded her master's degree in December of 2011, and presented at the conference we held over the past couple of days a beautiful study of the need for hearing screening in high-risk infants in Vietnam.
Yes,
something that
her
we
name
do on all
is
infants.
Dr. Lê Thu Hà.
Lê Thu Hà.
And this is actually one of the several research projects that were highly rated at the past seminar.
Exactly.
Yes, at the past conference. And we actually have footage on this particular study. So let's have a look at that.
While the program on retinopathy among prematurely born infants at the National Hospital of Pediatrics has witnessed many improvements, the monitoring and testing of hearing abilities in the infants have yet to be carried out. After 10 years of working in the pediatrics department, Dr. Lê Thu Hà feels that it is a significant subject of concern to decrease the death rate and disabilities in children later on. With the support of Professor Partridge, Dr. Ha was able to successfully research a device to test hearing abilities and prevent cases of hearing loss in Vietnamese infants in a master's thesis.
Thực sự là tôi cũng rất là may mắn, ông là người đã gợi mở cho tôi hướng đi về cái nghiên cứu này của mình. Ông đã luôn luôn nói đến vấn đề là phải theo dõi phát triển cho những trẻ sau khi ra viện ở sơ sinh, và chúng tôi đã thực hiện cái đề tài này với cái sự đóng góp rất là nhiều của ông. Ông đã truyền tất cả những các cái kinh nghiệm mà đã thực hiện ở bên Mỹ, cũng như là rất nhiều tài liệu cập nhật nhất để cho chúng tôi để có thể thực hiện được cái đề tài này một cách thuận lợi.
During the process of research, Dr. Ha did hearing tests on more than 300 infants and was shocked to discover decreased hearing capabilities represent in 20% of those tested. In the 305 infants tested, 64 were at a risk of decreased hearing capacity. 39 infants suffered from hearing loss or rapidly decreasing hearing capabilities.
Thực sự là trong quá trình làm nghiên cứu thì nó cũng có rất nhiều những cái cảm xúc lẫn lộn trong đấy. Khi cho những cái trẻ mà của mình theo dõi đến khám lại, kiểm tra lại, khi mà chẩn đoán được xác định chắc chắn là trẻ có giảm thính lực thực sự, thì một phần thì cũng cảm thấy yên tâm hơn, bởi vì thực ra tức là cái test mình làm là chính xác, mình phát hiện ra trẻ bị bệnh sớm. Nhưng cái cảm xúc nữa là cực kỳ là đau lòng, rất buồn, vì thực sự là những cái trẻ đấy là cái tình trạng giảm thính lực rất nặng, và để can thiệp nó cũng rất khó khăn.
Hearing screening methods, or AABR for infants, is one among two common techniques used internationally. According to Dr. Ha, high-risk infants are very likely to have hearing difficulties. These include not only premature infants, but also other infants with jaundice and infection, infants on antibiotics, and those with breathing issues on oxygen support. With Dr. Ha's research, the infant department of a hospital is currently carrying out hearing tests for the patients within the nursery. Dr. Patrice shares that this is particularly crucial in helping to provide early detection of disabilities in order to apply measures to intervene, helping the children to develop in the best way possible in the future.
Now tell us a little bit about her choosing this particular subject. You said it had veered off. You didn't think it was a good selection.
I saw a need at the National Hospital for a follow-up clinic for high-risk infants, and recommended that to her. It would be a very difficult project to take on because of her family concerns with a sick daughter. She chose something that is new for Vietnam. They had new equipment, and asked me to help her as she started the process. So she got the testing machine, the screening machine, and had trouble working with it. My nurses do it, so I had to try to help her without much experience. But we got the machine going, and within a year, she now has a master's degree.
Wow.
And I think it's an example of how research can be taken from a simple idea and an interaction between a mentor and a mentee taken to individual goals, such as getting a master's thesis, but then there's profound importance to what it will mean if we start screening high-risk infants in Vietnam. And that becomes a decision for the Ministry of Health to prioritize this. She's beautifully shown that it is both easy to do, that it's feasible in terms of how much time it takes a doctor or a nurse to do it, and that there's a profound need, a much higher incidence of hearing loss in Vietnam than I am used to in the United States. This takes a simple idea and collaboration into something that will change healthcare in Vietnam.
A leading expert in infant health care, Dr. Partridge is dedicated and wholehearted when it comes to his work. He's known to have stood for hours on end to adjust the health device of a patient. He's about getting down to practicalities rather than teaching pure theory. The doctors and nurses at the National Hospital of Pediatrics have been able to learn much from his spirit alone.
Em học được ở cô Linh là thứ nhất là rất là yêu bệnh nhân, thứ hai là ông luôn làm việc hết lòng, hết sức của mình, và ông khi mà ông làm việc ông không nghĩ cho bản thân ông mà ông luôn nghĩ cho bệnh nhân, cho gia đình nhà bệnh nhân trước tiên ạ.
Bác sĩ cô Linh đã làm thay đổi cái suy nghĩ về cách làm việc của mọi người, thì từ đấy nó cũng sẽ cải thiện rất nhiều trên cái ảnh hưởng rất nhiều trên cái việc chăm sóc, điều trị, tiếp cận bệnh nhân.
A talented yet very simple doctor. A dedicated and selfless mentor. A supportive and caring colleague. Those are the descriptions that the doctors and nurses of the National Hospital of Pediatrics have reserved for Dr. Professor Colin Partridge.
Cảm nhận tất cả của chúng tôi đối với giáo sư ở một câu là đó là một người nghiêm khắc, tận tụy nhưng cũng hết lòng vì bệnh nhân. Và chúng tôi cũng thấy rằng là học ở ông rất nhiều. Chúng tôi học ở ông không những là cái tận tụy đối với người bệnh mà còn không những không nề hà trước những bệnh nhân, đặc biệt là những bệnh nhân khó biến nặng. Ông không những là có tấm lòng tâm huyết mà ông còn rất trăn trở. Thì đấy là những cái mà chúng tôi đi học tập rất nhiều.
We'll talk about friendship and connections. We go back to the fact that you've been here, going back and forth to Vietnam since 2011, 10 to almost 11 years now. What do you think of Vietnamese people?
I love them. They're high energy. They are achievers. Everybody has a business. I understand that. So they're very, in the economic and political culture of Vietnam, they're very entrepreneurial. They learn incredibly quickly. Every time I come back for a medical tour, they're doing something else that I had not expected them to be able to do. I also love their sense of humor, that they have a way of being warm and fun and not really laughing at me, although they certainly could, but laughing with me about the real conflict almost in culture.
Through the process of working to Vietnam, your connection to Vietnam has gone beyond the medical field. It has gone to, attach you to certain families. You call them your family as well.
And they are. We have fun together, and I love the Vietnamese sense of fun and sense of humor that I, as a tourist standing somewhere, I was actually at the Central Post Office putting glue on stamps, and a woman next to me just started laughing because I was getting glue everywhere and doing it one by one. So she was very nice. She took the stamps out of my hand smeared them all over, and did it in 10 seconds, laughing all the time at how silly I had been. The thing that has struck me is how attuned they are to our experience of Vietnam. Given some problems with theft on a trip to Lao Cai, I was stunned by the number of people who came up and were hurt that this could possibly happen to us within Vietnam.
Yes, I'm sorry.
And it happens everywhere.
I heard about this incident, and I'm very sorry that it had happened to your group. But
it happens in my country.
You were basically, just for our audience who might not know about this, you were on a train up to Lao Cai or Sapa, and the group had been robbed, basically.
We don't know how it happened. We locked the doors. Things were missing when someone woke up at 3 in the morning and the doors were locked again. So we presume that they had worked with the lock, opened it up, but for 6 of us to sleep through being robbed was completely surprising. That happens, it's behind us. It did not make our trip to Sapa any less wonderful. We had a tremendously good time. We canceled the credit cards, etc.
And people have come to you.
People have been outrageously sympathetic, and I know that the National Hospital went out of its way to contact police and say, you need to check into this.
What else do you like about Vietnam? Tell us some of the experiences that you've had. I've heard that you've gone to a wedding ceremony in the rural
I've
side.
now been to an asking ceremony for a wedding, which was fantastic.
Where was it?
It was south of Vietnam, of Hanoi, about 2.5 hours by car. So we went in a long file of cars.
Probably one of your
lost.
trainees got married.
It was one of the infection control physicians. We were asked to the ancestral village, a very small village with a tiny village market. We were brought into the family household. There were many, many people there, most of whom did not speak English, and unfortunately I still do not speak enough Vietnamese. It was around 10:30 in the morning, and I was placed on a table, a dais, with the elders, and I'm probably about that age, so that was appropriate. They did not have any English, but they were able to communicate, so we toasted each other, we toasted Vietnamese-American friendship, we toasted Ho Chi Minh, all with giant bowls of rice wine. At 10:30 in the morning, I'm not used to rice wine. It was very colorful, there was a huge party. We came back for the wedding ceremony, and I was offered betel nut, which is one of the few things I've not eaten. I tried it.
Not even some Vietnamese. I mean, I have not gotten used to it.
It's bitter, but to be included in a Vietnamese family event like this is tremendously heartwarming.
To Dr. Partridge, Hanoi has become a place close to his heart. During each visit to Vietnam after the long, stressful working hours, he enjoys going out with his international colleagues to discover the city's many attractions. He shares that he loves the welcoming and hospitable nature of the Vietnamese people.
Hanoi is a tremendously busy and bustling city that has changed incredibly in the space of 11 years. There's been tremendous development, tremendous energy about its future. I was lucky enough to be here for the 1000th anniversary of the founding of Hanoi, a miraculous moment.
Hanoi is just so exciting and buzzy, and it changes every time I arrive. The people are so wonderful and calm, and they just have a peace about them that I just so love, that when we go back to America, it is just a culture shock going back to America. So I love being here.
Could could you share with us some of the future plans in the future? I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about the funding, which currently used to come from Orbis, now comes from the University of San Francisco, California in San Francisco. Right. But in the future, when this funding will be slowly dwindling away, what will happen? What are some of your future plans?
We're in discussion about that now. We have submitted several grants that have not been funded, and those we are reworking potentially to establish a curriculum at a master's level in Vietnam for research ethics. This has been submitted previously last year, and we will hopefully submit this year, which would at least gain me presence back in Vietnam. It has a different focus, not different really in a sense, in that it's capacity building, but that it's in research ethics. So it's a small subset rather than clinical care. It's much more about the clinical research projects that the Research Institute in Child Health at the National Hospital is now starting to pursue. If we don't get that, we need to explore something else that will continue the collaboration. But I hope I can come back. I know that I will come back whether I have a project or not.
I'm sure you have a family here.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for joining us on our show. Thank you for your wonderful contribution to the country. And I wish you all the best in your future endeavors and that you will continue being a part of the pediatric healthcare family here in Vietnam.
It's been an honor to be here today and an honor to come back to Vietnam.
Thank you very much. And that was our edition of Talk Vietnam with Dr. Colin Partridge, and we hope you enjoyed this talk session. We'll see you more next time here on Talk Vietnam.